the breadth of Jesus. Preach the gospel to the whole creation. Mark 16, verse 15. Jesus of Nazareth had a different perspective compared to others. He didn't have the desire to explore the world and was content with staying in Little Palestine. He chose a narrow path and didn't support popular people and ideas that were praised by many in his country. However, there was a reason for his narrowness. He wanted to achieve something greater. By focusing on a specific group of people and inspiring them, he started a movement that has impacted the entire world. He nurtured his followers with his teachings, allowing them to guide lost souls to God. By staying committed to his path, he made it visible for everyone to see. He rejected false beliefs and opposed evil individuals, making it easier for future generations to fight for truth and righteousness. By being faithful in small things, he gained power over many cities. By limiting himself and not seeking fame, he created a kingdom that embraced all of humanity and would never end. If you study the New Testament, you will see that Jesus always had the world in his sight and cared deeply for all people. It's interesting how the soul works, as sometimes being narrow-minded can allow you to see the bigger picture. Jesus faced conflict with his own people because they were narrow-minded and prejudiced. The Jews divided the world into two categories, separating themselves from other races. Inside Palestine, people were divided by rigid social classes. Hearts were closed off, and there was bitterness and hostility. They considered Samaria cursed, and people from Galilee would cross the Jordan River to avoid stepping on Samaritan soil. The Jews were exclusive and proud, constantly thanking God for their supposed superiority. However, Jesus had a different spirit. In his first sermon in Nazareth, he pointed out that in the past, God had chosen a widow outside of Israel and a Gentile leper to bless and heal. This was written in their own scriptures, but the people in Nazareth didn't pay attention. When Jesus praised these non-Jewish individuals, the villagers became furious and tried to harm him. They chased him through the narrow streets and attempted to push him off a cliff, but he managed to escape to Capernaum. This marked the beginning of Jesus' conflicts with the world. It's important to note that the first conflict arose because Jesus wanted to broaden people's perspectives. The narrow-minded villagers of Nazareth became violent because they couldn't handle the idea of thinking beyond their own limitations. Jesus' ideas are remarkable because they remain relevant and fresh throughout time. Unlike many other ideas that become outdated and forgotten, Jesus' ideas have the ability to encompass all nations and centuries. Political and scientific ideas often fade away with each passing century, but Jesus' ideas are so broad that they can span the world and endure for centuries. Even though almost everything believed and taught in Jesus' time has been swept away by the passage of 20 centuries, his ideas still live on. It is truly extraordinary that people in the present day can be a part of the same congregation as those who listened to Jesus 2,000 years ago. These ideas are so universal that each generation will continue to find value in them. If we could see the entire history of humanity, we would witness countless millions gathered around Jesus as their teacher. His ideas are able to cover all peoples throughout all eras of existence. Not only were Jesus' ideas expansive, but his heart was also incredibly empathetic. His compassion towards others surprised and scandalized his countrymen. He felt for all people regardless of their social standing or reputation. Even those who were despised and treated like outcasts, such as the publicans, received Jesus' care and attention. He went so far as to invite one of them into his inner circle of friends and allowed him to teach and work in his name. Jesus' actions shocked the respectable members of society, even when he dined with a notorious publican in Jericho. He also befriended the Samaritans, who were considered lower than the publicans and were despised by everyone. Jesus showed his compassion by providing religious instruction to a Samaritan woman and healing a Samaritan leper. His heart was so vast that he even extended his kindness to a Samaritan outcast suffering from a rotting flesh. To ensure that his wide sympathies were known to the world for generations to come, Jesus painted a picture entitled The Good Samaritan, which illustrates God's preference for a repentant publican over a self-righteous Pharisee. People were amazed by the extent of his love. His love knew no bounds. It was like an endless ocean. He didn't want his followers to limit their love because setting boundaries went against his nature. When Peter asked him how many times someone should forgive another person who wronged them, he suggested 7, which was considered a large number. But Jesus replied, "Don't set any limits. Love has no boundaries. You can't calculate love with numbers. It's not a mathematical equation." Whenever he talked about love, he said things that astonished his listeners. One day, he said, "Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat and persecute you." The people were shocked, thinking that only God could have such a broad love. Jesus explained that God should be the example for all people who want to live right, and that their goal should be to imitate God's unlimited goodwill. This wasn't just empty words. Jesus practiced what he preached. He taught forgiveness because he knew the joy of having a forgiving heart. He was always forgiving, never holding grudges or seeking revenge. Some people forgive because they don't see the seriousness of wrongdoing or lack the compassion to understand its evil. Jesus recognized the repulsiveness of vice, the offensiveness of vulgarity, and the ugliness of sin. His heart was so sensitive that it burned against evil. However, even though he hated the sin, he could still love the sinner. That's why, when his executioners nailed him to the cross, the only words he uttered were, "Forgive, forgive, forgive." Those words reflected the depth of his compassion. This overflowing love also explains his boundless hope. He was the most hopeful teacher. No matter how slow the student, he believed they could learn. People in Palestine were cynical and pessimistic 2,000 years ago. They had lost faith in humanity and believed that many people were destined for damnation. Religious leaders in Palestine believed that certain classes of people were beyond redemption and labeled them as lost. It was common knowledge that no exhortation or promise could reach these sinners. The Jewish church turned its back on them and focused on those who could be saved. However, Jesus, because of his love, also had hope. His hope was as vast as his love. He didn't reject those considered to be the refuse of society. He saw potential even in the lowest of the low. The outcasts of society shouldn't be cast aside. There was a chance for those who seemed hopeless, and hope for those condemned to damnation by others. You can't judge someone solely by their words or actions. There's more to a person than what they show. So Jesus showed that those labeled as lost were not lost at all, and that there was hope for them. Even in a place like Samaria, which was looked down upon, there were opportunities for growth. He didn't hesitate to urge those believed to have no heart, and even when the world treated him cruelly, he said, "If I am lifted up, I will attract all people to me." His confidence in humanity was boundless, and he had no limits to his expectations. He couldn't save the world during his time on earth, but he wanted to create a group of people who would carry on his mission. This Christian society was a significant event in the New Testament. The kind of people he chose to be a part of this society had different backgrounds and personalities. Jesus didn't just choose people who were like him, but he selected a diverse group. There was Peter, who was impulsive, and Thomas, who was more cautious. Simon Zelotes was passionate and belonged to a fiery political party, while Philip was more practical and slow-paced. John came from a respectable family, but Matthew, a tax collector, had a questionable reputation. Jesus wanted a broad range of people with different temperaments and abilities to be part of his society so they could reach a wide audience. Jesus had a grand vision for his work, encompassing the entire world. He was disappointed with the narrow-mindedness of the Jewish church leaders. He believed people from all corners of the earth would join his kingdom of God. At first, he told his apostles to focus on their own people, but this was just a way for them to gain experience and strength. Eventually, they were meant to spread the message to the entire world. Jesus entrusted them with the task to preach his gospel to all creation. National boundaries didn't matter anymore, and the apostles were called to disciple all nations. Jesus' broad perspective was a reflection of God's heart. Because of God's presence in Jesus, he had such inclusive ideas, compassionate sympathies, and far-reaching plans. God loves the world so much that he sent his Son to die for everyone. This message is for everyone, no matter their past mistakes or actions. God's love and expectations are limitless. He still believes in us, no matter how many times we've let him down. Whoever we are and wherever we are part of God's plans. He hasn't forgotten about us. When he designed his church, he made sure there was a place for each person. During the early stages, he advised his apostles to focus on their own people and not venture beyond their boundaries. However, this limitation was only for educational purposes and would eventually fade away as they grew stronger. He encouraged them to stay in Jerusalem until they were capable of handling the challenges in Judea, then move on to Samaria, and eventually travel to the farthest corners of the earth. Jesus didn't reveal his long-term plans to his apostles right away. Instead, before leaving, he shared the important message that they should spread the gospel to everyone. National boundaries no longer mattered, and their mission was to disciple the nations. This is how Jesus spoke to them before he disappeared from their sight. And ever since then, his followers have dreamt of conquering the world whenever they are closest to him. In Jesus of Nazareth, we see a glimpse of the vastness of God's heart. How did Jesus become so open-minded, sympathetic, and far-sighted? It was because God was within him, revealing himself to humanity. That's who God always is, compassionate, hopeful, and loving without limits. He loved the world so much that he sent his only Son to earth, who endured death for every person. Throughout the centuries, the Spirit, the Church, the Bride, and Jesus himself have called out to everyone, inviting them to drink from the water of life freely. Therefore, this message applies to all of us. No matter who you are, you have a special place in God's mind and heart. Regardless of your past sins, God sympathizes with you. Whatever you have said, felt, thought, or done, you are still the recipient of his love. Even if you have let him down, he continues to expect better from you. No matter who you are, where you are, or what you are part of his plans. When God devised his grand scheme for humanity, he never forgot or overlooked you. He created his church with a place specifically for you, and it will remain empty until you take your place within it. You cannot escape him. His arms are all-encompassing, and his love knows no bounds. His love is eternal.